the summer of '79, and someone is sexually assaulting young women in a Virginia college town.
We concluded that we had a serial rapist. People were scared to death.
Investigators have little to go on.
We were desperate. We wanted any help we could get.
Under the gun to solve the case, the police turn to a psychic.
This rapist is apologizing to me.
There's obviously some powers at work there.
Oh my gosh, well, what are we into?
Will the psychic help the police to stop a serial rapist before he becomes a serial murderer? Stanton, Virginia, a small, sleepy southern town nestled in the Shenandoah Valley, the birthplace of Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States.
It was a city of 25,000, but it was sort of caught in time.
But on the evening of March 14th, 1979, Stanton's peace is shattered. A knife-wielding rapist attacks a 22-year-old student in her room at the local college. It is the first in what would be a string of violent sexual assaults.
Stanton Police Department. I just remember getting the call, and the lady was very hysterical and upset, which, of course, anyone would have been going through that. I just remember how I felt so scared and helpless. My main thing was to try to keep her calm until a police officer could arrive.
Detective Ronnie Wiseman is put on the case.
Our first rape was very unusual because we had very few rapes at all. And this one seemed to be rape from a stranger.
All police have to go on is a composite drawing of the assailant based on the victim's vague description. Then, 2.5 months later, a second rape, only blocks away from the college. Again, few clues for the police.
Person came in a window on each one. He used a knife, and he had a stocking mask on. And so our best description was height and weight, race. That's about it.
Both victims described their attacker as a large African American. But because of the mask, they can't see his features, and he leaves few clues. Ray Robertson is the prosecutor for the city of Stanton.
Back in 1979, we didn't have DNA evidence. Any foreign hairs, any semen, any saliva, anything like that we found on them, we could get the DNA on that now. We couldn't do that back in 1979, and so it's a very different game when it comes to solving crimes now from what it was back then.
We just had no evidence.
With a violent rapist on the loose, the whole town is on edge.
For something like that to happen around here was a really big deal. That kind of stuff just didn't happen in Stanton. It made me be much more aware. Any place I went, I was always checking, being more cautious.
During that particular time, women were kind of afraid to walk streets at night alone, especially in the college area. All the windows were down and locked.
In a town where serious crime is all but unheard of, the pressure on local police for results is immense.
The community was actually in pretty much of an uproar.
I was following the news in the newspaper daily, especially on this case, because there was so much turmoil. I would say, wow, I don't envy the police officers that's working this case, because it's got to be tough.
Everyone that you would come in contact with, regardless of what you were doing, wanted to know how the case was going.
Then, driving by a construction site, the victim of one of the rapes spots the man she thinks attacked her.
One of the victims said, that's him. That's him. There's no question about it.
Police arrest the man, but they soon realize the case against him is flimsy.
The guy wore a stocking mask. How can you make an identification of a suspect that has a stocking mask on?
I think everyone knew that it was not right.
He had been convicted of minor offenses that were very different from the type of offenses that a rapist usually commits, and I really didn't think he had done it.
No sooner is the first suspect released than the other rape victim names a different man. A man she vaguely knows, and he too is arrested.
He actually flunked a polygraph test, so on the basis of the victim identification and the polygraph results, he was arrested.
Everyone seemed to say, oh boy, we got the guy. We can relax a little bit.
But the police don't relax for long. Less than a month later, a third attack, just like the first two. Wearing a stalking mask and wielding a knife, a man climbs through a window and rapes a 32-year-old woman. All this while the investigators' prime suspect is behind bars.
The second person that was arrested was in jail when the third incident happened. Really didn't think we had two people doing acts.
The suspect is released.
It's very sad. The police were scrambling to get an arrest in the case.
Women were on edge, and we were getting a little frustrated and maybe a little antsy, too, to solve some of these things.
With 3 identical attacks, police believe, unless stopped, the man will almost certainly rape again.
We realized after about 2 or 3, we had a serial rapist. This is something that was very new. We'd never had anything like this.
Under intense pressure, Detective Wiseman calls in Special Agent Darrell Stillwell of the State Police.
You had a person that was operating within about a 5-block area. There were all types of sightings, window peepings, entries into houses, burglaries, thefts of small items.
The perpetrator's rapid escalation from petty burglary to violent rape makes police fear what he'll do next.
The possibility that something will go down, a resistance that will cause a homicide. There's always the possibility of that.
Then, 6 months after the rapes began, a chance event changes the whole course of the investigation. Psychic Norine Reneer arrives in town to give a talk at the local college about ESP and the paranormal.
I had been teaching at Blue Ridge Community College, and at the very end of my lecture, a young lady stood up in the audience and asked me if I would do a public service. I said yes, and she told me that there had been a rapist in the town, and her sister had been one of the victims, and if I could hold her ring and see if I picked up anything.
Norine uses psychometry, a common psychic technique.
It seems that object has memory or goes beyond memory, and I can see images in my head.
Norine holds the victim's ring while the student records her response.
And I remember holding it and picking up several pieces of information that came into my mind. She had a tape recorder and was taping it.
Despite knowing nothing about the case, Norine immediately connects with the horror that is gripping the town.
I felt this small, peaceful, beautiful community was terrorized, certainly the women, because of this rapist attacking again and again.
Norine also claims to see details of the actual crime.
I remember seeing a stalking mask over.
Desperate to see her sister's attacker brought to justice, the student takes the tape recording of the psychic to the police.
Stalking mask.
The cops are doubtful at first, but agree to listen to the tape. Like the student, they are impressed with what Norine has to say.
Norine told us this guy had used a stalking mask and a knife in all his rapes. All the things that the victim had told us that never were reported in the media.
Well, we were sort of in disbelief. How does she know this? Because these things weren't out.
On September 2nd, a 4th woman is raped. The victim, a young woman who was babysitting for friends. And then, a few weeks later, the rapist, wearing his trademark stalking mask, strikes again, this time a 23-year-old woman.
The public image of the Stanton Police Department plummeted. It was a worst-case scenario.
With the attacks becoming more frequent and more brazen, the cops are willing to try anything, even a psychic.
We were desperate. We wanted any help we could get.
Dabbling in the paranormal to solve a crime is not conventional police procedure.
We had no idea what we were getting into, and it was very new.
I think that when the police first agreed to work with me, they had no clues, and he kept raping, and they had no information, so they thought, what do we have to lose?
Can a psychic working with detectives help to track down a sexual predator before serial rape turns to murder?
And we looked at each other and thought, oh my gosh, well, what are we into?
In the summer of 1979, a violent sexual predator is haunting Stanton, Virginia.
We concluded that we had a serial rapist.
5 violent rapes have been committed by a mysterious masked man carrying a knife. With few leads, the police have all but hit a wall.
The public image of the Stanton Police Department plummeted. It was a worst-case scenario.
In desperation, the detectives turn to psychic Norine Reneer, who has offered to help.
I was just nervous. I had never worked for the police before.
Today, Norine Reneer is one of America's best-known psychics. But before Stanton, she had never worked with the police.
So my own concern was, will my mind be able to do what they want?
The first thing investigators do is take Norine to the home of the third victim, the sister of the student Norine had met.
We just let her go. Didn't say a word like, yeah, you're right, or no, you're wrong, or anything.
We didn't chat. We just went, hello, hello, and I started working.
We took Norine to this house. About halfway up the steps, she said he came in that window right there.
The rapist had climbed into the window and had touched the banister.
Norine's vision uncannily matches what the investigators already believe.
We found a ladder laying in the yard, and we came to determine that the person went in a upstairs side window. These things had never gotten out.
How could the psychic know something that hadn't been released to the public and the media?
When he opened the window, in order to get in, he just had to sort of jump to the banister.
That banister had given police the one hard piece of physical evidence they have.
They'd gotten a real good palm print where he had to grab the banister.
Walking through the home, Norine's paranormal visions of the attack come thick and fast.
He was already waiting for her when she got home. They said, show us.
She pointed to a room and said he was waiting back in that room for the victim to come home. That was true also. Before she got to the bedroom, she said, there's some violent activity up here.
They looked at each other, but they didn't say anything. And then we walked in.
She walked in the bedroom and sat down on the bed, and she started talking as if she were the victim.
Stutters.
Norine's description of the attack matches every detail of the victim's report. The rapist had come in the window. He had been hiding in wait. He had attacked her in her bedroom. Now, eerily, Norine claims she has taken on the role of the victim and reveals something startling about the rapist.
He's apologizing to me. And I was so shocked. But it just was like a little scene from a movie, just that one quick little picture, and I could hear his words.
I'm sorry.
This bizarre detail that the rapist apologizes to his victims is already known to the investigators.
She was in a car accident.
He spoke to each victim, carried on very apologetic conversations.
And he apologized to some of the victims. It was very, very unusual.
But the psychic claims to have one more detail about the rapist.
I feel like his pants and shirt, they match. He's wearing a uniform. I could feel the material, and uniforms have a special heaviness to it. And I could tell that the pants and the shirt matched.
We were in disbelief. How does she know this? Because these things weren't out.
Norine's first vision of the rapist suggests he's a laborer. But as she talks, she's also receiving other more cryptic psychic signals.
What I'm seeing, it seems to be going around and around.
The entire time, she would sit and talk, and she was drawing on the pad with a pencil, just drawing a perfect circle.
Norine is sure the circles she's drawing mean something, but exactly what she can't say.
I remember first seeing him driving something. I remember knowing that whatever he drove went around and around.
She said, I have no idea what this means, but it has something to do with his occupation.
Without knowing anything, the psychic has accurately described the attacks and given the investigators a profile of the serial rapist.
There's obviously some powers at work there. It must be. And I've pretty much concluded that in my mind based upon this particular case.
Impressed with what they've learned so far, the detectives take Norine to the home of the most recent victim.
They never told me any information, never gave me any feedback. Taking me to a second victim's house, I knew that I must be onto something.
There, she has a vision that would provide police with a vital clue. She claims to see where the rapist lives.
See this theater marquade, and I knew he lived real close. I remember feeling the brick.
Which was very interesting because there was an old theater right in the vicinity where all this was occurring. Most of these things occurred within a mile and a half, or just within 5 blocks.
Norine has told the cops where she believes the rapist lives, but she also knows how he can be identified.
I wanted to go through his body to see if I could pick up any tattoos or scars. When I got to the knee, I could see the scar. First of all, it hurt. I remember the limping.
Pretty deep scar on his leg that would cause him a slight limp. Very new to us. We had no idea. She was getting a pretty detailed picture of this attack.
Can the psychic's cryptic clues help the police to track down a rapist who's already attacked 5 women?
And we had the information, but we didn't know what to do with it.
In the summer of 1979, a serial rapist is terrorizing the college town of Stanton, Virginia.
The police were scrambling to get an arrest in the case. There was a crisis of public confidence.
Desperate, the investigators have enlisted a psychic.
She said she was picking up energy, and she was taking on the role of this victim.
I feel theater. I knew he lived real close, and I remember feeling the brick.
She said he lived in an apartment right across from a movie theater. Brick apartment, she even stated. We did concentrate on the brick apartment building across from the movie theater.
We were in plane cars, and we had them positioned all around the city, and especially in that particular area.
The community became absolutely racked with fear. There was a tremendous need to get this case solved.
And it could have gone real bad for us.
Armed with details provided by Norine's extraordinary psychic visions, police stake out the movie house and other key locations in Stanton and lie in wait.
We spent many sleepless nights on this case.
We would stake out till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, then come back out about 7.
Then, after 2 weeks of around-the-clock surveillance, on the evening of December 27th, a break.
Stanton Police Department.
A call came in that someone was peeking in the window.
The call comes from a woman living less than a block away from the movie house.
Ma'am, is the suspect still there? I understand, and I'll get an officer on.
We had one of our cars sitting right near the end of that driveway.
Got a report of a person messing around the house, looking in the windows and this, that, and the other. And when he came out of the yard, it was a fenced yard he had to walk out of. When he came out of the yard, we stopped him and questioned him about his business in the area.
And something else.
He had a limp.
Could this limp be linked to the scar the psychic predicted the rapist would have on his knee?
Did you hold up for a minute?
Wasn't his home. We didn't know anyone in the home. Told us he was looking for some boxes because he was moving. He told us, start telling us a number of things that just didn't make any sense.
Got any weapons on you? Anything on you?
I think we all looked at him and said, I think we have the right guy here. I don't think there was any question.
Have the police got the right man? He does live by the theater.
From around here? Yeah. Watch your head.
The peeping Tom is taken into custody without a struggle. That man is 22-year-old James Bruce Robinson of Stanton. Police charge him with attempted burglary. But is he the man responsible for raping 5 women?
We knew we had him pretty well there for an attempted B&E, but at that point we had no idea that he was the rapist.
We did get his fingerprints, and I'd gotten a good palm print, so I took his palm prints, and we took those to the lab the next day.
Then they remember one of Norine's most detailed predictions. The rapist would have a big scar on his knee.
It's very strange to ask him to pull his pant legs up. He had no idea why we asked him that. I was so excited when he pulled his pant leg up and showed me a great big scar there. So all of these things just started coming together.
The psychic is right. But to nail Robinson, they need more. They need hard evidence.
The evidence that we had was pretty, shall I say, skimpy on each one of these sexual assaults as far as linking anything particularly to him. We had one palm print off of one of the scenes.
The investigators devise a plan. To persuade Robinson to confess, they take him to the scene of his crimes.
It was a technique I used in many criminal investigations. Put him in a car and drive him to a neighborhood.
We did a lot of running around in the car with him, asking him things as we drove by people's houses that he had visited. And
he started out making confessions to trespasses and burglaries. That's how it started.
Despite admitting to a string of burglaries, Robinson denies rape. But then, suddenly...
Sir, the lab just called back. Your palm print matches your suspect.
We got a call over the radio that the lab had called and matched that palm print. He knew exactly now that he's had it.
Confronted with the evidence, James Robinson breaks down and confesses to the rapes.
He gave the police details that only the true rapist could have known.
There's little doubt that Norine helped police put the serial rapist behind bars. Her remarkable insights were right on almost every count. She described how the perpetrator had entered the homes, how he had apologized to his victims. She told police the suspect lived close to a theater, that he limped, and he had a scar on his knee.
This is Dixie movie theater. It's been here for years. And coincidentally, right across the street are the Woodward Apartments, and where the suspect was found to live.
And what about those puzzling circles Norine drew?
The suspect drove a cement mixer truck. He would leave the truck parked in front of the apartment or somewhere close, and he'd go in.
I must admit I was very impressed by he drives something that goes round and round, and it turned out to be a cement mixer truck. That was pretty cool.
Norine's vision of a man in uniform is also true.
The night we picked him up, he had the shirt on.
At the trial, the prosecution paint a chilling portrait of a man driven to rape and rape again. James Bruce Robinson pleads guilty and is sentenced to 5 concurrent 20-year sentences for the Stanton rapes.
We were very impressed with Norine and the information that she was able to give us.
It gives you a little extra something to look for, when you're out on the street.
Everything that she gave came about.
And then at the very end, when I left, as they were shaking my hands, they said, "When will we catch him?" And I thought for a second, and I said, "Before Christmas."
And we got him on December 22nd.
Called me later to thank me for my Christmas present.
In Homestead, Pennsylvania, someone is raping elderly women in the dead of night.
That was a despicable crime.
Certainly a lot of fear.
Police have clues, but no suspects.
Somebody that we knew and that was just getting off, watching us.
Then a psychic has a vision of the attacks.
Horrible violence and screaming.
And the attacker.
This guy was like Spider-Man.
She also makes a chilling prediction.
We were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
Can her mysterious visions help the police to catch a rapist before he becomes a killer? Homestead, Pennsylvania, a small neighborly town on the outskirts of Pittsburgh.
You knew the next door neighbors so well, they were like your own family.
A town built on steel.
Armor for tanks, armor for the ships. We were very much an important part of World War II in Homestead.
But in the mid-1980s, U.S. Steel is leaving Homestead, and with it, 15,000 jobs disappear.
It sort of was like a death blow to Homestead.
And something else is unraveling the fabric of this close-knit community. A rapist is attacking elderly women in their own homes in the dead of night.
It's like somebody raped my mother.
The first assault took place on August 10th, 1983. An 86-year-old woman living alone is attacked and raped in her bedroom. Detective Tom Hobart is the first officer on the scene.
Most people in the town knew each other. If you didn't know them, you knew family members. You knew someone associated with that family. That was a despicable crime. We'd take a lead and we would exhaust that lead. We worked that case for a number of years, and it seemed like at everything we were doing, we were running into dead ends.
No arrest is made and the case goes cold. But 2 years later, a 61-year-old woman is raped in her second-floor bedroom, a carbon copy of the first assault.
I was born and raised in this town. The first two victims I knew personally. These are our folks. These are our people. We knew them. We knew their sons, their daughters.
People tend to forget. They didn't immediately associate the two crimes. We, however, associated immediately just because of the MO, if you will.
Though police know the rapes are connected, they have no suspect.
The victims never saw anything. The victim would awake with him placing something over their face, whether it was a pillow, a blanket, whatever he could. But he always covered their face.
We knew fingerprints matched, but we couldn't match them to anybody at the time. We had serology matches and pubic hair samples.
Forensics evidence told us that he was a black male. We knew he was a rather large man. The victims, when they would describe, they'd actually use their hands and say, you know, I grabbed him and his arms were big.
You take a small area that is saturated with dogs and none of the dogs barked. We knew that this individual responsible lived in the immediate neighborhood.
He was probably a younger man because his method of entering these homes, he had to be strong, he had to be agile. Forensically, we had the evidence from the very beginning. We just didn't have a suspect.
But you got to imagine, other crimes go on. We're a small town, a small department, so we had to pool resources as we need them. We couldn't let the rest of the town suffer because of these incidents.
The rapist leaves clues, but the police still have no suspects, and there is no arrest. Then, 18 months later, a third attack. A 75-year-old widow raped in her second-floor bedroom.
Evidence was pointing to one person that they realized they had a serial rapist on their hands.
The interviewing the women broke your heart. It was very, very embarrassing for them to sit down and talk to me. I was a young man. It just became very personal.
Saving this community was our mission.
The frustration had set in from not being able to find the assailant.
I don't think Hobart went home for a week. I mean, when he did go home, I had to order him home.
With the culprit still at large, Detective Hobart does something unusual. His brother met a psychic at a party and suggests she might be able to help.
He's very skeptical of psychics, and he had went to a party in the Greensburg area, where Nancy's from, and he had met her at the party, and that she was a psychic, and she did a couple neat things that he thought were pretty neat. We chased all our forensic leads down. We hit dead ends with those. And when you ask a policeman how to do something, you get a police response. Policemen think the same way. We may as well get someone in from the outside who can give us a new perspective. Whether it was good information or bad information, it was going to be new information. And when he gave me this idea, I thought, why not?
You know, I kind of fluffed it off at first, and then I realized, you know, he's serious. And I said, hey, let's go for it. See what can happen. It certainly couldn't hurt.
Nancy Meyer is a psychic who specializes in what she calls ranging.
What I usually use when I'm working on cases, the environment itself. The whole environment absorbs what happened. It runs as a movie, but I'm in it, and I can pull the information out.
I contact Nancy, and I asked Nancy if she could meet with me, maybe provide me with whatever she could do to help.
Give me a time and I'll be there, because these women who were being assaulted were the age of my own mother.
I had hoped that Nancy would come in and say, here we go, this is the guy you're looking for, let's go knock on his door, and I'd open the door and I'd arrest him and the case would be over. That's not what happened.
But before the psychic gets a chance to meet the detective, there is another rape, just 2 weeks after the third. A 64-year-old woman is viciously assaulted in her second-floor bedroom, but police still have no one in their sights. When they finally meet, Detective Hobart tells the psychic nothing about the case.
I wanted her to be able to come in and tell me something, not me tell her. She did request that her and I walk the general area because she said that she would get a better read, a better vibrations on what she was looking for. I walked several steps behind Nancy and let Nancy lead the way.
As they walk through the 2-block area where all 4 of the rapes occurred, Nancy Meyer appears to tune in on the crimes.
Several times, she stopped right in front of one of the homes and would say, I'm getting some bad feelings from this house.
The assaults were so bad, it came right through the walls of the house.
Okay.
Somehow, Nancy Meyer is able to pinpoint information that only the police knew. Remarkably, she is able to tell the detective in which homes the attacks occurred.
Picking the homes where the assaults took place, it was uncanny. She was saying things that no one told her, but I knew to be fact already.
And now, Nancy claims she can see the actual attacks.
In the images, I saw that he was African American. It was his neighborhood. He knew the streets. He knew how to get from one house to the other. He even recognized the people. And then I'd be looking up at the side of the house, realizing this guy was like Spider-Man. He climbed drain pipes. He went up the sides of houses. He was going in second-story windows. He clearly enjoyed the risk.
As to how that entry was made were very, very accurate, as if she almost knew what had taken place.
He would come in the window, and he would stand for a while looking at his victim sleeping. And it was very clear by the time I got to the 4th property that I was picking up the exact same thought patterns on every single one of those properties. There was no deviation.
But what she tells the detective next is something he didn't know.
It was a street light, and as he turned to look to the street, I got a good visual of his face.
So I asked her, I said, if you could draw him? And she said, yeah.
And I said, holy hell, we got the break we've been hunting for.
But is it enough to stop a serial rapist before he strikes again? In Homestead, Pennsylvania, a faceless rapist is targeting elderly women in their homes. Stymied, the police call in a psychic for help.
Whether it was good information or bad information, it was going to be new information.
Who claims to see the attacker's face.
And as he turned, I got a good visual of his face.
Something no one up to now had been able to do.
We got the break we've been hunting for.
Because Nancy's psychic description of the rapist is so specific, Detective Hobart brings in a police sketch artist.
Got a broad face, the eyes.
Mainly we use composites and sketch artists to eliminate people more so than who it is, it's who it isn't. Most people have seen the overlays that are... We actually had a sketch artist that did the drawings. He changed whatever Nancy was feeling that wasn't right. He changed.
He has this leather hat. Every time I visualize him, he has his hat on.
Normal practice is to remove anything like a hat from the sketch so as to focus on the suspect's features, but producing a police sketch based on the word of a psychic is anything but normal.
I'm off to the side. I have nothing to do with Nancy explaining the sketch artist. I'm just accompanying her. And it's a long day. The hat's not right. You have to move the hat this way. You have to move. I was becoming frustrated, and the sketch artist was becoming frustrated. It's a hat. It's a hat. You know, but no, a hat had to be a certain way.
Well, we got in an argument over the hat. You don't put a hat on a sketch. This is against protocol. You don't do it. And I said, yes, but if people are to recognize him, the hat has to be on him because he's never without it.
As far as a clue that we were going to go out and everybody had a hat on, and that wasn't the situation. A lot of people wear hats. Nancy explained a black leather cap, and she had it over and over, I felt sorry for the sketch artist, how many times she made him change the hat.
And we told our officers, look, this is not an official wanted poster. This is not something that a victim of a crime has produced. This came from Nancy, a psychic.
And as most people have seen sketch artists, they're never going to be a photograph. But we were still looking at this saying, hey, it's better than what we had.
A very broad nose at the bottom.
But before the psychic sketch is even circulated, the rapist strikes yet again. April 24th, 1987, just 5 weeks after the last attack, a 76-year-old widow is assaulted in her home.
Each one escalated that he became much more aggressive.
The entire town is on edge.
Not panic, but it was certainly a lot of fear.
We had now formed an actual task force where we were on the streets every day.
There were a lot of tired policemen from Allegheny County and the sheriff's departments.
With the attacks intensifying, police ask the psychic for help again, but this time she takes a different approach.
And I said, I think we need to get ahead of this guy and start using my abilities to figure out where he's going to target next. And as we crossed over one street, I could pick up this man walking around late at night, checking out when people's lights were going off. And I noticed that he was on this street quite a bit. And I said to Tommy, this has to be near where he's living, because I keep sensing him.
And what the psychic says next is the last thing that police wanted to hear.
Nancy said, we have to get this guy. We're going to have to get him soon because
we were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
And with the psychic's next revelation, the investigation takes an astonishing turn.
And I felt him checking a house out particularly closely.
And she said, this is not one of your victims, but I'm getting some bad energy coming from this house. Do you know who lives here? There was no indication of the house that who lived there. There was no special signs on the door or anything like that. It looked like any other house in the neighborhood. So when she picked that out, it raised the hair on my neck, because there was no reason for Nancy to be able to pick that particular house out and not knowing anything about the resident of the house. However, I knew that that was a relative of the chief's.
For Police Chief Kelly, the case has just become up close and personal. He takes the psychic's warning seriously and stakes out his grandmother's house.
I got my German Shepherd. Tell him to come on. Bring it on. When you're sitting there in the silence waiting for something brutal to come in, you knew that probably it was going to be a life or death situation. You're aware of every single sound in the night. You can hear your heart pound. Adrenaline takes over. And you're crushed when any of these ladies are victimized the way they were. And it's personal.
But the chief's grandmother isn't the next to fall prey to the rapist. 2 weeks after Nancy's chilling prediction, on a hot June night, an 86-year-old woman living just yards from the chief's grandmother becomes victim number 6.
I was devastated. It was at a lady's house who shared the same alley and the same ethnic last name. In fact, they were related.
It was like, ha ha, I know you're here. I can still do it.
Despite working night and day, police appear no closer to capturing this elusive predator.
Many times, I would get up out of bed, come to Homestead, hide in an alley, sit in a car, sit on the side of the road, hoping that I would see something.
The police were passing out boat horns for the women, 200 of them in fact, so that they could blow a horn at least and have the police come, because they were loud horns. They were advising people to buy dogs.
We were doing everything humanly possible.
The residents were living in a lockdown fear. It wasn't a community that has whole house air conditioning. It was hot. It was summertime. It was blazing hot. They couldn't open a window and put a fan in the window for fear that someone would crawl through that window.
They lived in jail while the perpetrator was probably walking around watching us. And we had to catch this guy.
I was riding up the hill and I saw this elderly lady that I knew carrying some grocery bags up the hill. And I stopped and I said, come on, get in, I'll ride you home. It's just too hot. And you shouldn't be walking this hot day, you know. It gave her a little bit of hell. And when I dropped her off at her house, I personally had said to her, check your windows and just be careful. And she says, okay, you know. I just walked into the station, and Chief Kelly said, we had another rape yesterday. And I said, oh, man, like, who was it? And he mentioned the name, and it was the lady that I had taken up the hill.
Despite the mayor's warning, on August 25th, the 76-year-old lady became the 7th victim. It was 2 months after the 6th attack, but this time the violence has escalated to a dangerous level. Fear has gripped Homestead, Pennsylvania. A serial rapist is preying on elderly women, and police seem powerless to stop him.
These are our people. We knew them.
Chased all our forensic leads. Now we hit dead ends with those. The frustration set in.
Psychic Nancy Meyer is helping with the investigation. She's certain, if not caught soon, the rapist will turn killer.
We were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
At the scene of the last rape, they had found a large knife on the steps of her home that he had threatened to cut her throat if she didn't stop fighting.
We were convinced 100% that we were dealing with somebody that we knew and that was just getting off, watching us.
But it was, again, looking for that proverbial needle in a haystack. He wasn't going to appear to be public enemy number one. He was going to appear to be a nice young man.
With the investigation hitting a wall, Detective Hobart again contacts the psychic.
After the last victim, Nancy and I spoke again. I was eating, sleeping, and drinking this case, along with other officers. I wasn't the only officer doing that. I'm sure that my frustrations of being unable to locate this guy were starting to show.
And I said, Tommy, you're going to have him by next week. It's going to be over with. You're going to arrest him. You won't need me anymore. I'll believe that when I see it. And but he said, gee, I hope you're right. I said, I hope I'm right. I hope this nightmare's over with.
And then, the break the entire town has been waiting for.
None of our victims had anything ever taken from them until our last victim.
One of those items was a shotgun.
The phone rang, 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a guy I know, and he said, I know who you're hunting for. I said, come on. They took a shotgun last night, didn't they? We never publicized that. Never. And he said, it's over Steel City Arms over in Braddock. The guy's trying to sell it. I can set it up for you.
The informant sets up the buy, and the police, armed with the psychic sketch, stake out the pawn shop and wait. When the suspect arrives and takes back possession of the gun, the police are there to arrest him.
And I had the sketch sitting next to me on the seat. And he turned and kind of looked at me. I said, this was like a photograph of this guy. And of course, at the time, my belief in psychics went sky high.
When he did return and when he did take back custody of the shotgun, they were there to arrest him on a charge of receiving stolen property. And to this point, they didn't have his fingerprints.
We brought him into the police department, Mirandized him, his rights, rolled his fingerprints. We had a district attorney there advising us to make sure that every move we made was calculated, that there's not going to be any mistakes. This man is going to go to trial. There's not going to be any motions to suppress. There's not going to be any technicalities to walk on.
We called a fingerprint expert. When he prepared the prints, he just looked up and said, gentlemen, it's over.
You would have thought everybody in the room would have been high-fiving or yelling or screaming. Wasn't a sound in the room.
Matched the fingerprints, and all the forensic evidence on down the line matched.
After 4 years and 7 vicious attacks, the man arrested is 22-year-old Dennis Foy. Unemployed, Foy lived with his parents on the same block where one of the rapes occurred.
Foy's arrest in the fall of 1987 came after his case received not only local but national publicity.
I think my feeling is for the victims, and they're through it, and so am I.
Thank God that these women that were raped were heroes enough to go to court.
You saw 3 widows and a woman who had never married, who had told police she, in fact, had been a virgin, a 76-year-old woman, had to testify in detail.
A year later at his trial, Foy faced the women he violated. In court, the jury hear the intimate details of Foy's trail of terror. He knew his victims and staked out their homes, waiting for his chance. He broke in by scaling the side of a house and entering through a second-floor window. Inside, he attacked the defenseless women and stifled their cries for help with a pillow or whatever else was nearby. Sometimes he tied their feet and hands. He threatened his final victim with a knife. The judge described his acts as unspeakable. Foy is convicted on all counts and receives 100 years in maximum security prison. With no inside knowledge, how could psychic Nancy Meyer have known so much about this case? She knew the attacker was African American, lived in the neighborhood, and knew his victims. Through her psychic ranging, she described how he entered each home through the second-story window, and she correctly predicted when the investigation would be over. And what about that hat? When Dennis Foy was arrested, he wore a hat eerily similar to the one Nancy had the sketch artist draw.
If you're gonna put a hat on somebody, you put a hat on, whatever. But she wanted it tilted a certain way. She wanted it to be, to cover a certain part, you know, the head. The things that amazed me is she hit so many things right. And the last thing was the hat. She just hit, the hat was just, it was there. It was the way she described it and painstakingly described it.
Today, Homestead, Pennsylvania is bouncing back from economic downturn.
We haven't bounced back to where we should be, but we had a developer that bought the U.S. Steel property. Right now it's called the Waterfront.
But no one can forget those 5 years when one man held an entire community hostage.
You know, these acts affect a lot of people. Thank goodness they caught him. Who knows what the next step might have been.
You'll never lose that feeling, you know. You'll never lose the feeling that you could have done more for these people.
Just to do it for fun, I don't think so. It's not fun ranging assaults like that. There's nothing fun about it. But when it gets results, then it's worth it.
She said we would have them, and it wasn't shortly thereafter that we did. So, you explain it.
In Memphis, Tennessee, someone is killing prostitutes. Police make an arrest, but a psychic tells a homicide cop he's got it wrong.
I knew that he had arrested the wrong man.
We knew we had the right man. There was just no doubt about it.
Then the killer strikes again. Can the psychic help the cop to catch a psychopath before he kills again and again?
It was totally evil.
Perched on the banks of the Mississippi and home to the blues and rock and roll, where Elvis lived and died. Memphis, Tennessee is one of the most famous cities in America.
Memphis is like the capital of the Mid-South. It's completely different from the rest of the state. We have the river. We have the blues.
But Memphis is also one of the most dangerous cities in America. It's a city with a long tradition of crime and violence.
Memphis was always known as a fairly violent river town. In fact, during one period of time in the 20s, Memphis was one of the most violent cities in the United States.
Anywhere from homicides to assaults to prostitution to work in the street. There was a lot of drugs.
There are parts of South Memphis that you don't want to go.
August 15th, 1988. 25-year-old Sharon Denise Moore is working the street in the notorious South Memphis red light district, but her last trick turns deadly. She is shot at point-blank range with a .32 caliber handgun. It's the 95th murder in Memphis that year. It doesn't take homicide detectives long to line up a prime suspect. 2 witnesses finger a man named Larry Ward.
They had canvassed the area and sent some people back out to where he had been, and actually had statements from 2 witnesses who basically tied him to the victim prior to her death.
And he left with her and came back by himself and had a pistol.
Cops soon track Ward down and corner him close to the scene of the crime. After a brief chase, he is quickly arrested.
They felt that they had a pretty good case on him, and that's the reason he was charged.
The very next day, however, the routine homicide takes a bizarre twist. Carol Pate, a psychic visiting Memphis on vacation, has an unexpected and disturbing vision about the murder, even though that murder has not been made public.
I got a vision, intuitive knowledge, if you will, that there was a serial murderer on the loose in Memphis. Hi, I'm looking for Captain...
She immediately calls Captain Ken East of the homicide squad.
A lot of police departments really don't like to get involved with psychics, but I've always been open-minded.
I told him that I had this vision of this serial murderer and that he was stalking and pursuing prostitutes and shooting them. And I told him I had references with other police departments, and if he felt that what I was giving him was important, I'd like to meet with him.
There's no reason not to respond to her, as long as she seemed like she was on the up and up.
Carol Pate uses a technique known as psychometry to connect with her paranormal subjects.
An actual photograph of a crime scene contains the signature frequency of both the victim and the murderer.
When she touches it, she says she can tune in like a radio to receive information.
I can then go into the past, present, future. He showed me some photographs, crime scene photographs, and I began to get some information. Number 1 was I knew that he had arrested the wrong man.
The wrong man. Is it possible Larry Ward is not the killer? Or has the psychic made a mistake?
The witnesses had said that he was in there bragging about shooting the girl. So we knew we had the right man. There was just no doubt about it.
It didn't really make a lot of sense to him. Nothing to back up the information that I had.
And I told her I appreciated it, and if we had anything come up, I'd call her.
I felt like I would hear from him again.
Ken East ignores the psychic's strange visions. Six weeks later, another prostitute is murdered. She's shot with the same type of gun as the first victim. Police immediately suspect Larry Ward, who had been released on bail until his trial.
He'd been out for 3 days, so we picked him up again.
But the cops are wrong. Ward surprises them with a solid alibi. At the time of the second murder, he was in a restaurant miles away. A dozen witnesses back up his story.
It doesn't make sense because here you've got him so well on the first one and with witnesses, and so we go back to those same witnesses and re-interview them and offer them a polygraph, and it turns out they were mad at him and had lied on him.
Ken East's open and shut case is suddenly blown wide open.
We were at the dead end. It was block 1, start all over.
Carol Pate was right after all.
So I picked up the phone, called her, and I said, well, our case kind of fell through.
It was in fact true that he had the wrong man.
2 murders, and Memphis homicide has no suspects. Now Carol Pate makes a chilling prediction.
This was a serial murder. This was not going to be 1 or 2. It was going to be more.
This time, will the police listen? In South Memphis, 2 prostitutes have been shot dead. Police arrest a suspect, Larry Ward. But psychic Carol Pate tells a homicide detective he's made a mistake. Further investigation proves she's right.
It was in fact true that he had the wrong man in custody.
Now, desperate to catch a killer who had already struck twice, and with nothing to lose, Captain Ken East reconnects with the psychic.
He wanted to know if I'd be willing to come to Memphis to go to a crime scene. I said, sure, if that'll help.
Okay, great.
Even so, Ken East decides to keep his meeting and his relationship with Carol a secret.
Some of the investigators that were working on the case, they work hard on it, and if they think that I'm having them follow up on leads from that's given to me by a psychic, they're not going to be happy about it.
Ken and Carol meet at the scene of the second murder. 28-year-old Loria Ann DeBerry had been shot twice. The bullets confirm she had been shot with the same gun as Sharon Moore. But who pulled the trigger? Can the psychic help the detective?
Okay. I asked for a photograph of the actual body at the crime scene. And I used that along with the energy of the location where the body had been found. It's right in through here. So that I could then get the energy of the murderer. I was able to see the murderer, to describe the murderer. I saw an Afro-American man in his early 40s. He had a goatee. He had more refined features. Wiry build, 5'8", 5'9".
Ken East takes notes on everything the psychic says.
That's a lot of description from anybody, even a witness.
Now Carol Pate's insights take her inside the mind of a killer.
This man is a multiple personality. But the murdering personality is named Al.
She doesn't know if that's what part of the name that is, but that's Al. She's coming up with that.
Carol sees two opposite personalities in the killer.
I got a shy personality, the true personality. But Al was a very strong, violent, evil personality. Al wants to take over.
Carol's vision of Al is chilling.
He is compelled to kill. This was a serial murder. This was not going to be one or two. It was going to be more.
Ken East isn't taking any chances. He decides to use the psychic's description of the murderer in his investigation.
It would give us more to talk to the witnesses in the scene where the prostitutes were hanging out. The more you give, the more they'll give you back.
He's not done.
The psychic and the cop agree to keep in close touch. Ken gives Carol photographs of the crime scenes and the victims to tune in on any new visions of Al.
I said, you have an open line to me. You call me if anything comes to you.
What I was looking for when I was tuning into the energy is what we could do to catch him. What was his next move? Who was his next victim? Where was it going to be?
They don't have long to wait. A week after the DeBerry murder, the badly decomposed body of another prostitute, 30-year-old Linda Tratt, is found hidden in an alley.
We knew there was something fishy because the prostitutes were being killed.
With this discovery, the homicide investigation is expanded. Sergeant John Garner is put in charge.
That case was assigned to me, and then I inherited them all and became the lead investigator on all the cases.
With the body count rising, John Garner and Ken East both suspect Carol Pate's prediction is true. A serial killer is stalking prostitutes in South Memphis.
We felt sure if we didn't get on top of it that there would be some more bodies found.
10 days later, there is another shooting. 22-year-old Tony Thompson, a transvestite dressed as a woman, is driven to a remote street corner, dropped off, and then shot twice. This time the killer makes his first blunder. Tony is badly wounded, but alive, the first real witness.
He'd been shot 2 times, and 1 bullet was still in his body. So we took him to the hospital and had the doctors remove the bullet, and they did match.
Tony Thompson is able to give police a detailed description of his assailant. Incredibly, one that matches the description Carol Pate gave to Ken East.
A lot of sketches don't turn out to be exactly like the person looks either, but that sketch kind of fit her description that she'd given, and I was impressed with that.
Meanwhile, using materials sent to her by the detective, Carol has more visions of the murderer. But she has difficulty seeing past the killer's evil personality, Al.
Al was overwhelming. I couldn't see where he lived because when he would go home, Al would go away. And here would be this shy, quiet man that barely had a handle on sanity.
Prostitutes on the street confirm Carol's and the transvestite's description of the killer.
We showed our sketch, and some of the ladies of the night had seen this man.
But investigators still don't know who he is. What the police, the psychic, and the prostitutes of South Memphis do know, however, is that the killer is getting bolder. 6 days after Tony Thompson is shot, 37-year-old Joyce Thomas is killed with the same gun in the same area.
When the third murder came in down on Peebles Road that was tied to the 32, we had bullets compared, and we knew all 3 came from the same gun.
With the third killing, police released the news to the public. There is a serial killer in South Memphis. TV reporter Kathy Thurmond Edwards was assigned to cover the story.
And all of a sudden we have this on the news and a serial killer. It was quite bizarre.
3 months have passed since Carol Pate told police that they had arrested the wrong man for the murder of a young woman. It's now clear that a vicious killer matching the description that the psychic gave Captain Ken East is targeting prostitutes in a South Memphis red light district. Can the cop and the psychic catch him before he strikes again?
He was totally evil and violent, incredibly violent.
A serial killer is shooting prostitutes in South Memphis. 3 women are now dead. And psychic Carol Pate has given a homicide detective an insight into the mind of the killer.
This man is a multiple personality, but the murdering personality is named Al.
This was not going to be 1 or 2. It was going to be more.
With each shooting, police intensify their investigation. The time between each murder is getting shorter. With a serial killer on the loose, all of Memphis is on edge.
Here we are in the Mid-South, the Bible Belt, and we've got this strange story about a serial killer targeting prostitutes and transvestites. It was the talk of the town.
But police aren't totally in the dark. Carol's description is confirmed by the only eyewitness, a transvestite who survived a shooting. He also gives police another lead, a vague description of the killer's small gray car. This also fits with what detectives have been hearing on the street.
Anybody talking to prostitutes on the street? Have you had any trouble? And yeah, I had trouble with a male black, and he was driving a gray car. And
so we knew we'd kind of narrowed down to the small gray car point.
Back at her home, Carol has another psychic vision.
Hi, this is Carol Pate.
The psychic calls Captain Ken East with new information. She feels that the killer is about to murder again, but there is a twist.
I saw into the future that his next victim was going to be at a stone church in that area where the other murders had occurred. I didn't think we could stop the murder, but I knew that he could be captured because of the stone church.
We have several that fit that description, and they were downtown area. We passed this information on to the Uniform Patrol and Vice Squad and told them to be on the lookout.
Armed with the information, police step up patrols in the area. But despite that increased presence, the very next night the killer strikes again. he shoots another transvestite, 30-year-old Mark Eric Lewis, near the Claiborne Temple, the oldest and biggest stone church in Memphis, just as the psychic had predicted. But again, he only wounds his victim, and Lewis is able to run for his life and call for help. The next day, Lewis relives his ordeal to reporter Kathy Thurmond Edwards.
All I could see was fire. And I said, "Oh, you shot me." He said, "Shut up." And I went to reach and grab him. I remember pushing him, because I pushed him, he fell back. That's how I got the second shot hit me in the neck.
Finally, police get a big break. An officer in the area spotted a small gray car leaving the scene of the crime.
Lieutenant Ralph Roby, who was a night detective lieutenant, was en route to the scene of where Lewis was shot, and he saw a small gray car in the area and just jotted down the tag number. We came into work that morning at 8 o'clock. He was getting off. He came by Homestead and said, "I saw this last night. It may be of help, may not."
And we ran the license number and found out that it belonged to James Barnes.
James Barnes is a 44-year-old delivery man who lives and works in South Memphis.
And so we go to their house and talk to his wife, Diane, and she said that her husband's been driving the car and been going out at night and that kind of thing. And so we still didn't have as much evidence as we really liked, so we decided to set up a surveillance on him.
The theory was that if he leaves the house, goes to a prostitute area to pick a prostitute up, take him down in hopes of finding the weapon. If you don't have the weapon, at least we can talk to him and maybe get him to confess to it, basically.
The very next night, James Barnes drives back into the red light district of South Memphis. Homicide detectives follow him closely.
And what we're trying to do is follow him to the crime scene areas in that area part of town. And he did, in fact, go there. Well, they tried to stop him at that point because we didn't want anybody else to get hurt.
He stopped in front of the Norine Motel, the site of Martin Luther King's assassination 20 years earlier. Barnes tries to escape, but detectives are right behind him. Finally, he's cornered, and police arrest James Barnes.
At daylight, the investigating detectives went back out on the scene and did find a gun, and it was a .32 caliber.
The gun found at the scene of the arrest is confirmed to be the same one that killed and wounded all of the prostitutes. With James Barnes in custody, questions still remain. What motivated his killing spree? And is Carol Pate's prediction that he suffers from a split personality correct?
We came down to interview him in the homicide office, and then at one point he wanted us to handcuff him. We basically said, "You know, what's going on with you, Barnes?" And he said, "You know, I'm not him. My name's Al."
The psychic was right. Al was behind the killings.
Al wanted Barnes to kill his wife and children, and he would argue with him, and every time he wanted that to happen, that's when he would go out and pick up a prostitute and commit a murder to satisfy Al.
How could the psychic have known about the evil personality called Al locked inside the killer's head?
You've got to be impressed with the name Al when he's sitting there during the interrogation and he starts acting crazy and asks you to handcuff him so that he won't hurt you or himself.
Barnes was in there, but I could barely feel him, and I felt a reluctancy from him to do what was happening. But Al was overwhelming.
But the psychic has even more information. 2 weeks after Barnes is arrested, Carol Pate calls Ken East back with a vision.
Ken, I think I have some more information for you. I saw that he had taken clothing of another victim and had left it on the banks of the Mississippi. It's between a church, a small church, and the old bridge.
Of course, I had no recourse but to send somebody out there at that point. I mean, after I've been dealing with her so long, I had no reason not to.
After a search, a detective finds blood-stained clothes exactly where the psychic said they would be. A few days later, the clothes are identified as belonging to Linda Tratt, whose decomposed body had been found 4 weeks earlier.
We were all very impressed that we found what we found. It's just one more thing that was tied together as evidence.
But the bullet that killed Linda Tratt was never found, so Barnes can't be charged with her murder. Police charged James Barnes with the murders of Sharon Moore, Loria Ann DeBerry, and Joyce Thomas. District Attorney John Campbell prosecutes Barnes in court.
You can be a multiple personality and not be insane. You know, if the personality that's controlling you at that particular time knows the difference between right and wrong, he's competent.
Barnes eventually pleads guilty to all 3 murders. Today, he is being held in a prison hospital where he will remain for the rest of his life. In this remarkable case, psychic Carol Pate was right about almost every detail. The police did arrest the wrong man. She provided an accurate description of the killer.
Wiry build, 5'8", 5'9".
She knew he had multiple personalities and that the personality behind the killings was named Al. And she predicted that he would be caught near a stone church. She even made a believer out of Captain Ken East.
So any time that you get information that's from somebody that has no reason to know it, and then you find the information is in fact true, you have to be impressed with that.
Carol Pate's uncanny psychic visions undoubtedly helped a cop catch a killer who had terrorized Memphis for months.
I wanted him caught. That was the important thing. He had to be stopped.